Welcome back to The Health Hunt, a human, humble, and sometimes very confusing exploration of how to actually understand your health. Okay, so you know that moment when your body does something that just doesn't make sense? Like one issue has been bothering you for months, maybe even years, and then suddenly it quiets down and something completely different takes its place, and you're left thinking, wait, what just happened?
Well, I'll tell you what happened because today's episode is exactly that. Something happened to me recently that I genuinely can't fully explain, but it feels really important, hence this shorter but more important episode. Not just because of what changed, but because of how it changed.
And as always, we're not coming in with a perfectly packaged answer. This is the real conversation, something that Dan and I have been unpacking in real time. And what makes this especially interesting is how directly it connects to the mind-body work that we've been talking about. Because this experience, it kind of challenges the way we're taught to think about pain. Because we like to share, and this podcast is all about our very real human health experiences. And Dan's real-life experience, in this case, ties in a very interesting way to the mind, body, and chronic pain discussions we've been having. You know the drill. Before we get into it, the Health Hunt podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. We're not medical professionals, and nothing shared should be considered medical advice. As always, consult your healthcare provider before making changes to your health.
So, as I've been very open on this podcast about my neck issues, slightly a broken record in this regard, but these are important. We're talking about symptoms such as imbalance, my brain fog, the migraines, limited range of motion. Pretty soon our audience can recite these back to me, but these are important. So I've gone pretty deep on it. I've mentioned multiple MRIs, more recently the full body scan with Prenovo, which was very helpful. We've identified things such as spinal stenosis. There's something structurally going on, but at the same time, it's never felt fully explained. And I think it's important to mention I've been dealing with this daily. It's been disruptive.
And I just want to pause for a moment and acknowledge the gravity of what you just said. This health issue is disruptive. That's the word you used. And it's on a daily basis in your everyday life. And that's not to be taken lightly. And I think a lot of people deal with chronic conditions that they just sort of deal with. They just say it's part of life and they have to get through it and they just deal. And they don't necessarily explore some of the causes. So I think it's just important that we sort of note that what we're talking about is considered a chronic condition.
That's a really, really helpful call out, Sandy. And disruptive is actually the operative word there for sure. So let's shift and let's fast forward to now, recently, last couple weeks, certainly now as well. My lower back started acting up. Specifically for people with lower back issues, this is an L5S1. This was reported on my Prenovo MRI. I've had this since, high school. I played, playing a lot of tennis. It's kind of been hibernated. I've managed it pretty well. And so it's the same pattern. Symptoms are lower back tightness, back locking up, or feeling sore in certain areas. And actually, even this morning, I woke up with a little sciatica, which hasn't really presented much in the past, but not a newer symptom, but definitely a different level of this symptom. I think all of this comes from trying to be more flexible, more mobile, working out harder. I've definitely been pushing these things, and my body is now talking to me.
So I just want to jump in for a second because you said something that is interesting to me, and you mentioned the Prenovo scan. And so I know you already knew about these issues with your back, but part of me is thinking maybe seeing it again on paper reminded your body that there's something there. And in some way that can be a contributing factor. Because I know for me, I was very hesitant to even do the full body scan because I knew that there were things that were going to show up in terms of my joints or my back. And I wanted to make sure that it didn't get into my head, even though it's not new information. So I just want to kind of put that out there.
I would just say that very quickly and let me just kind of, from a bird's eye view, if someone is listening that doesn't believe in mind-body stuff, totally respect that. You should look into more. But I am not one of those people that's come into this podcast being very experienced in mind-body, but I have an open mind. And to Sandy's point, my symptoms of the lower back, which have always been there, or the issue has always been there, the symptoms maybe haven't, do line up with the Prenovo report in some regard. Now, can you say that's the specific reason? Probably, maybe not, but there's got to be something there. And so I just want to let everyone know from someone who's not coming from a mind-body kind of mindset, but learning and understanding and accepting it, that there is something to be said about that in this scenario for sure.
Yeah, and this is a cue the music moment because it's just really one of those things that makes you go, hmm. And I'm sorry, now that's going to be stuck in everybody's head.
Wait,
I had to be
who's
said.
the singer? Who's the singer of that?
CNC Music Factory.
Oh, yes.
From the 90s.
God.
Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry. Everyone, it's now going to be...
Is that the same group that goes, I've Got the Power?
No, it's not.
Okay.
Snap. That's Snap. I'm good at this
Wow.
game. I know I'm really good at this game.
Okay.
I'm fun to watch movies with, too. This is just an aside because I know what movie that an actor in the movie has been, every other movie they've ever been in, who they're married to and who they dated and who they got in a fist fight with. And
wow. Okay. Wow.
It's good times. Yeah. Okay, moving on. Oh, I just wanted to mention, too, so we're talking about a topic that correlates very closely with things that we discussed in episodes 21 through 23 of the podcast. And that's when we had mind body coach Hillary Rollins on. So if you want more context for what some of this conversation is based on, we're not going to recount all of it here. So you can go back and check out those episodes.
Right. So let me just add on to this that when my back symptoms presented, my neck symptoms, the imbalance, the brain fog, I'll ... the audience can recite them back to me. Those, I'm doing air quotes right now, those went away. And so there's something to be said about how that shift happened so fast. And don't get me wrong, in the past, the symptoms were intermittent, they'd come and go. But this all lines up with reading a report that confirmed kind of things I hadn't been thinking about for many, many, many years. I mean, I haven't gone and gotten a back MRI in years, but a prenatal full body scan is the full body, so you're getting that. And so this is interesting. So I guess my body or my brain just decided, hey, the back problem is the bigger problem now. Let's focus there, and it kind of shifted everything. So as Sandy's kind of had some really important thoughts so far, I wanted to bring this to Sandy. It feels like it's just more of a coincidence. I really, truly believe that. And so I wanted to kind of get her take on everything.
Yeah, I was very excited when you mentioned this was going on. Not that your back hurts, but that you were having these thoughts and maybe sort of thinking about things in a different way. Because I think some of it also, and again, we'll talk a little bit more about the mind-body connection, but I think some of it is also maybe you opening up your mind a little bit to other potential scenarios based on the conversations that we had in this series of mind-body work and learning a little bit more about the neuroscience. So it's exciting for me, and we can talk about it a bit more, but I just think it's an interesting discussion. So I'm excited that we're having it and that you're allowing us to have it here on the podcast.
Of course.
So in the brain science, these things probably happen more than people think. And you don't really necessarily notice it. I think, again, because we had these discussions, your brain kind of picked up on the fact that like, hey, my neck's not hurting anymore. Now I'm feeling it in my back. And you probably, again, having not had these conversations, really thought about that. You would have just been like, oh, my back hurts, and not tried to understand why the symptoms were moving around. And so that probably happens to a lot of people, and they don't necessarily think about it or try and understand it. But it's certainly a very interesting topic. And again, you guys can go back and listen to, I think, episode 21 is where we really got into the brain science. But in this work, there's something that's called, it's the analogy is that it's like a substitution of symptoms. In some circles, it's referred to as the symptom imperative. And so again, going back to the neuroscience, one of the theories outside of it being a structural issue is that the brain decides that emotional stress or things like that are more difficult to deal with than physical pain. And so when there's unprocessed emotions, or I'll give more examples, the issue that your brain is trying to alert you to comes out in physical symptoms. And that's sort of the alarm. And so an example of this is, we grow up thinking that we've both had MRIs that tell us that we have structural issues. And so you're brought up to think that that is the cause of the pain. And that's because the doctors, in most cases, believe that that is the cause of the pain. Well, the newer brain science says that that is not necessarily true. And that it's actually the pain is in the brain, not physically coming from the body. And so an example of this is that you can have, and this I think really helped open my eyes, but you can have two people with the exact same MRI, bulging discs or spinal stenosis or whatever it is, and one person has pain and the other does not. So just that alone tells you that it may not be the actual structural issue that's causing the pain. And so
I have a
again,
question.
yes.
Why? So there are doctors I've seen that are traditional doctors have actually even said something to that effect that, no two people are the same. Someone who has the same issues you may not feel the symptoms you're feeling. Why do they, and you may not be able to answer this, why do those doctors recognize at least that much, but then can't take the leap farther that of the mind-body symptom imperative that you were talking about?
Well, they haven't been trained. That would be my assumption. I think it's kind of like where we all, we talk about advocate for yourself. And so there's things, even if you're a doctor and you've been trained a certain way, there's things that make sense and don't make sense. And so, like you said, they have seen patients with, again, same issues on MRIs and have noted that some have pain and some don't. So mentally, even though they can't explain it, they draw some sort of conclusion that maybe deep down they know that that may not be the cause of the pain. But also, I have to assume most doctors don't like to not have an answer of some sort, especially when there's something specific in an MRI, then in theory, or maybe old theory, points to the pain. So again, I'm not a doctor, so I haven't been trained, but I think that that's probably part of it. I mean, you hear stuff, in everyday life, you hear something, if it doesn't make sense, you question it, right? So I think that that's probably the basis of it.
Well, I hope that people do question things like that, because that's the whole point of this podcast versus just listening to something like that and walking away and being kind of dumbfounded.
Yeah, that's the literal point for this. So in this circle of research, this is known as a normal abnormality. And so, there's a lot, again, I'm not going to go through all the research, but there's a lot of research that people of a certain age, like everybody has a bulging disc of some sort, or everybody has this. And that's just part of the body changing, but it doesn't necessarily cause pain. So my understanding, and I have taken courses in this and I've done pretty extensive reading, but that what's happening is that the brain and the nervous system are perceiving a threat. And it's not just the physical damage. And so as we discussed, we experience biological changes in the body related to a real threat. So again, we joke about, like, you go back to, if a tiger is chasing you, adrenaline hits, to run, you have fear in your body and you do whatever you need to do to get away from the tiger. But the thing is that your brain can't distinguish between a real threat. Like, again, tigers are probably not going to chase you, but let's just, for examples, use that. And something that you're stressed about or a past trauma, it's the same physiological response in the way that you sort of deal with that potential threat. And so when you're talking about a threat that is something, that your brain is conceiving of, but there's not an actual tiger by you. And this could be something like, you're walking, I use this example, you're walking on the street and you see something that looks like a snake. You feel scared, right? And then you get closer, you realize it's a stick. And then your brain is like, oh, it's just a stick, and you calm down. Unless you don't have the ability to change your thoughts and you still think it's a snake, and that's a whole other issue. But so when it's a thought that's triggering this response, it's considered an internal predator, again, which is different than a tiger. And so I wanted to give some examples and some context. And so this came from one of the courses that I took. But some of the sort of common internal predators, way to think about it, would be repressed or unrepressed emotions. And I know this is hard for people to kind of conceptualize, because you may not think you're an angry person, but that could go back to your parents telling you at 5 years old, it's not okay to be angry and have a temper tantrum, right? So that's just a kind of a way of thinking about it. Or potentially unprocessed trauma, something that you stored away that's living inside your mind and it manifests in your body. Also things that we don't think about, and I know that I am very susceptible to these, but self-criticism. Like, I am my own worst critic. Self-doubt, outsized fears, rigid expectations. Again, that's sort of maybe part of the self-criticism, but I have huge expectations of myself and I criticize myself for not reaching them. So it's a bit of a hamster wheel of problems inside my mind. And then self-imposed pressures. And again, that kind of goes back to all of these topics. So a lot of this goes back to experiences from childhood, because when you're a child, you don't have the same tools and nobody teaches you emotional regulation. And again, sometimes if you have a temper tantrum, you're told that that's not okay. And so you repress those feelings so you don't get in trouble. And so things form based on our experience as a child. They don't have to be big T trauma, like abuse and things like that. But as a child, those are big things. And so if they're not processed, when you're older, certain things will trigger that, and that can cause, problems later in life.
I should probably add here, and this is off topic, but that's partly why I do this too is that my favorite. So no one knows this, but my two favorite animals are, one is an alligator, not a crocodile, and the second is a tiger or a lion. And so,
Oh,
as you said, tigers running after me, I pictured like 20 baby tigers running after me, which would be like I would stop, turn around, and like jump into the pile of baby tigers. Now, if an adult tiger was running after me, I would really want to pet it, but I know I would be eaten to pieces. But I'm just letting you know, as you were talking about the tiger example, because it's one of my favorite animals, I was just picturing the cutest tigers just chasing after me, like on their fours, and just me like, oh, come here,
okay. So for you, that imagery was a delightful experience. And now that you've
Yes.
said it, by the way, my new favorite thing is my Instagram, again, off topic. My Instagram is showing me tiny, tiny baby goats, mini baby goats. And that's all I can think about.
Are they hopping?
They do all the things. They're in the
Nice.
house. They're snuggling. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. That I would like to be chased by a bunch of baby goats. That's if we're
There we go.
picking things to be chased by. So
I had to interject.
no,
there,
I
so.
love that. And maybe we get along well because I'm a Leo. So if you like lions, there we go.
There we go.
Okay. So, baby goats and baby tigers notwithstanding, in general, we go through life where the brain is always scanning for danger. And that's a mechanism to kind of protect us and keep us safe, right? I think we talked about this a bit, but there is a disconnect between the evolution of the brain from, I don't know, however many tens of thousands of years ago and now. Because back then you did have to look out for adult tigers, maybe not the baby tigers, but you needed to scan your environment to look for threats. And so we don't need to worry about those things now, but that's still part of the brain and how the brain functions. And so really in your daily life, you're just going through and again, some of these dangers are stressors, things that you don't want to deal with, or people that are complicated or whatever it may be. But the brain thinks it's helpful because it thinks that if it can predict a danger, then it can solve the problem and mitigate the results. And so you're kind of in a state of hypervigilance. And that's again where things like, we hear about fight or flight comes in and your brain is in a state of raised cortisol and sort of all of the things that you would need to create adrenaline. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but you're in this state of like being vigilant, and that's not necessarily healthy. And that's when a lot of the problems come in. And so like pain can be an output of that. It's not always a direct reflection of damage, even if an MRI tells you it sees what it thinks or the doctor interprets as damage. So let's say we accept the theory that your pain could be caused by internal threats, like we said, right? And so if the pain is basically an alarm, it's a signal, right? Something needs to be dealt with in your brain and you're not dealing with it, so your body manifests in a pain symptom. And so let's assume, if we can, for a minute, if that is the case, then potentially solving one issue, let's say, whatever, you sleep better and your neck doesn't hurt, you haven't dealt with the actual problem. And so the body or the brain needs to send another signal to the body to get your attention. And that's an interesting sort of dynamic about why pain can move around. Okay, so in the context of what you described, like if I was, again, I took courses to be a mind body coach and I've really gone down a very deep rabbit hole. But if you came to me and we were talking about your symptoms and you explained to me how you'd had this horrible neck pain for all of this time and then suddenly it kind of went away and the back started bothering you, my first thought would be that's a pretty good indication. And again, it's not 100%, but it's a pretty good indication that there is a mind-body component. So when the pain or the sensation or the problem travels around, that's just one of the things that we look at to see if maybe we need to explore this route. Right. So your brain is very likely trying to get your attention for something. And we don't need to get into what all your potential triggers might be. That's potentially a therapy session. I don't know. But I mean, it's just, to me, it indicates, I don't want you to have to air whatever your personal stressors out.
Nice. I'm all messed up. Yeah.
I mean, I'm very messed up. I could talk about it every week.
I will say one thing. You made me think of something, Sandy. When I would have my imbalance, this is years ago. Well, I mean, yeah, years ago. I mean, I've had the imbalance the entire time, but the specific scenarios years ago, I would tell my neurologist, I'm like, hey, if I get back to my place and I'm in my regular life and I have all these imbalance symptoms, and then I go on vacation or I'm gone from where I am for like a week and I'm like a rock star, and then I come back and then they're back. And like this was like conversations I legitimately had with my neurologist. And he'd say, well, it's common because I think he said something like to the effect of it's common because you're out of your daily pattern and you're not thinking about it as much. But like you wouldn't go so far to say, exactly what you're saying. It would just be, again, like I was talking about earlier, how, two people have the same conditions, but one's experiencing pain or another. The traditional doctor will get to the conclusion, but can't back up into the why.
Exactly. And what you're describing actually is a very common theme in the mind-body community. And it's talked about a lot. People going on vacation. It's exactly what you said. You're outside of your normal routine, potentially outside of your normal stressors. You're not getting the emails and texts and things that you do at home, but also the patterns are different. And so that goes back to the neuroplasticity of a routine, because your brain is always anticipating. And I can give an example too with, I've had issues where my back has been worse. And one of the times was during a very emotional time in my life. And I didn't realize it until I got through it a little bit, but that had caused a horrible back flare. And when I was able to pull myself out of it and remember that it was an emotional event that triggered it, I started doing little things. And so it would be the case where when I would bend over, I would anticipate that my back would hurt or that it was unsafe. You're told like you had to bend your knees a certain way or bend down a certain way. And so I started to, right before I would do that, tell myself I'm safe. And I would actively push away the feeling, because certain things, I do certain things. I have a problem with my elbow. And so when I move it, and I can feel this in my brain, the second before I move my elbow a certain way, I feel the pain. And so it's a learned pattern. Your brain just assumes that when you do a certain thing, it's going to have a certain result. And so I think, again, with vacation, like your day is different, your timing is different, you're having way more fun. So this is probably why Mexico, Sandy, that's me in Mexico, is way more fun than me anywhere else. I don't know. It's a phenomenon. Everybody in my family knows about it. It's just a thing. And so that might be why I'm like invincible. I'm not tired. Nothing is wrong with me. It's delightful. So maybe we should plan a health trip to Mexico.
Sandy, t-shirt time.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, like I was saying, like the pain, think of it as an alarm signal. It's your brain's way of trying to get your attention. And so if you're ignoring one symptom, maybe the symptom's not even bad enough, it might throw something else at you, right? It's like an alarm going off in one corridor, and somehow you break that and you make that stop, and then an alarm goes off in another corridor, and you can't really explain why. And think about it this way too. I mean, when you're in pain, especially when you're in severe pain, like there's no better distraction, right? You can't think of anything else. Think about when you stubbed your toe. And I know that is not chronic pain. That's, it's acute pain. But when that happens, you can't think about anything else until that pain goes away. So to the extent your brain is trying to protect you from whatever stress or traumas or whatever is going on in your brain, pain's a pretty damn good way. And I guess the reason this has always made sense to me is because, again, even before the internet, when I was first diagnosed with arthritis, it was very clear to me that it would get significantly worse around exam time or anything that was high stress. And so I couldn't explain it. I didn't have the language to explain it back then, but it was very clear to me that there was a correlation, and it couldn't just have been something in the quote disease. Right. So when I started to learn about how this works a little bit more, it just made more sense to me. So one other thing that came up, and it happened last week, and I wanted to share this because, again, it goes to this sort of concept of mind-body work. But I have, because of all of my health issues and because of the medications I was on and all of those things, my narrative is that if anyone sneezed in my zip code, that because I have such a horrible immune system, I would get sick. And not only will I get sick, I would get sicker than the person that sneezed 7 miles away. And also, I would then be sick for a month. And I wouldn't be able to function. And my whole life would be turned upside down. And so knowing this, there's an element of catastrophizing that the second I get a sniffle, I think I've like come into contact with germs. I didn't even get a sniffle yet, but it was like watching a movie about a viral outbreak. And I could see the germs multiplying and taking over my entire body. And then empirically, if you look back at my history, all of this is true. I got sick. I got sicker than anybody else that originally made me sick. It lasted for a very long time. So by subscribing to this version of myself, I'm really creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I reinforce it based on confirmation bias, right? It happened all of these times, so it just must be true. And so I'm telling this story because a couple of weeks ago, I started to feel some sinus pressure. And especially when I bent down, it was really intense. But I kind of just thought it was allergies, so I didn't pay too much attention to it. But by the end of the day, I was feeling exhausted and very worn down. And I was getting that, when you're getting sick feeling. And normally I would start to spiral out of control because I would fast forward to the outcome of me being sick in bed for 4 weeks and not being able to do my job and all of the things. But because this work is so sort of prevalent in my brain right now, and because I've been doing this work, I was able to pull myself out of that loop before I got stuck there. I took some extra vitamins, which can't hurt, but maybe there is a somatic component, and just taking them tells me that I'm getting stronger. And I reminded myself that I work from home and that I really had no sort of outside of the house commitments. And so if I got sick, the world wouldn't end. And I know this sounds silly, but for me, the world won't end versus I'm going to die is a pretty big shift. And so, I sort of just settled in and I let go of all of the fear. And I went to sleep, and I actually, I stopped. It was like 5, 6 o'clock. I stopped working. I made sure I relaxed because I think I was a little bit tired. And then I went to sleep. And the next day I woke up and I wasn't sick. And again, to anyone listening, this might not sound like a big deal, but in the history of my decades of life, that has probably never happened. Like literally, if I feel a cold coming on, I'm getting it. There's no stopping the train. And so it was really profound for me. And it was also very exciting, to wake up realizing that I didn't freak out. I kind of just accepted whatever would happen and moved on.
So I have 2 funny things that I thought about. First of all, congratulations on that. That is very real to you. And that's like a big deal. 2 things I thought about is if you are getting sick, I was thinking about the movie Outbreak. Did you say Outbreak?
Yes. And that's the movie that plays in my head.
Yeah. If you're getting sick and you turn around in your tree, you see a monkey, you're getting really sick. Then it's an outbreak. It's a pandemic. If you ever see a monkey in a tree and you're getting sick, I'm kidding, obviously. But the other thing that made me think of is being here in South Florida is I constantly am in delis and restaurants, and the crowd here obviously skews a little bit older. I'm in Boca Raton, so I don't need to explain much more about that. But when someone sneezes 2 or 3 times very loud, the entire restaurants, everyone turns around and looks at them. It's like, oh, that's the person about to get me sick. You know what I'm saying? It's like, do you ever experience that in restaurants out here where, I guess maybe you don't really do the restaurant scene out here.
No, but in general, that would have been me. Yeah. If somebody at the checkout line, wherever I was, if somebody even looked a little bit sick, I would freak out and I would douse myself in hand sanitizer. I had buckets of hand sanitizer before COVID was a thing. I was already online shopping. I used to limit how much I would go out. And so yes.
The amount of under the breath chatter that goes on when when we have a restaurant sneezer or a restaurant cougher. Oh my God. Don't get me wrong. It doesn't sit well with me either, but it's just one of those things I've picked up more so here than anywhere else.
Yeah. Well, then let's talk about airplanes. God forbid somebody on the airplane, you want to open up the door and push them out.
Well, you know how I feel about airplane hygiene, so we don't have to go on that road.
Yeah. Anyway, so just one last thing I want to say about getting sick, because I think it's also worth mentioning, and there is a mind-body component. In the episodes with Hillary Rollins, I talked about understanding that having symptoms and getting sick, and it wasn't just with the arthritis. A lot of times we say our immune system is very weak when we're tired or we're extra stressed. Well, I think a component of that is that getting sick is your body's way of getting you to stop or giving you an out. Sometimes you get a little sick and you can power through it, but sometimes you get the flu and you literally can't get off your ass. And again, I think there's a component of your brain and your body colluding to be like, you got to just take a break. And so it's interesting to think about it like that. When you get sick, we just think maybe somebody sneezed on us, like at the restaurant, but there could be much more to it than that. So could have this discussion all day. So if you've ever felt like your symptoms don't follow logic, and I really like logic, like they move or change or they don't match what your tests say, you're not crazy. Your body might just be communicating in a way that we weren't taught to understand yet.
And so I think for me, the biggest shift is realizing maybe this isn't just about fixing one specific body part. Maybe it's about understanding how my whole system is responding. And honestly, that feels like a completely different conversation.
Yeah, I personally, I love it. And we're not going to just solve this overnight. But being open to it and looking at it this way, that is the big shift. And if this episode sparked something in you or made you think about your own symptoms differently, We would really love to hear from you.
You can always reach out, share your experience, or send us questions, because a lot of what we talk about on this show comes from real stories like this.
And if this episode resonated, send it to someone who is stuck in the loop of what's going on with my body, because chances are they're not alone either. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.